Start our first piece. I've been looking forward to doing this for a while in my own geeky way. I'm very fascinated by studies and data and all this, especially when you try to get to know an area. A study like this one really would help. The Kootenay Association for Science and Technology for the longest time have been working on a business retention study, and we've got on the telephone with us their spokesperson, Andrew Zwicker. So let's bring him in. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning, Mark.
So you guys have been working on this study for some time. Tell the folks, first of all, what the concept of the study was and sort of what you did when you started it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this study, it's been called the Business Retention and Expansion Project, or the BR&E project, as we've been calling it as we move along here. It's actually one piece out of four big pieces of a larger project that CAST and then our partners, CRIC, the Kootenay Rockies Innovation Council over on the east side of the mountain, along with the Columbia Basin Trust, have been working on here, which is that MATS project. It's it's the manufacturing and technology sector. So it was a bit of a pilot project by Columbia Basin, where for 2 years we're doing these four different initiatives to really see what we can do out there to try to help out and boost up the manufacturing and technology sectors here locally. So this one part of it that we're talking about this morning, the business retention and expansion, it was all about going out there and talking to the actual businesses that work in that world and getting them to tell us, hey, here's the reality of the situation. Here's what's working good for us. Here's what's not working so well, and here's what we're planning to do down the road. And then putting that together and kind of coming up with some suggestions on perhaps what folks like CAST, CRIC, CBT, our government could do to really help those folks out and really grow that sector of our economy.
Now, when you start something like this, do you sort of immediately take a look at the roster of who you can speak to? Was that at all challenging, or was it fairly plain? Like, do we have a lot of manufacturing in this area?
It's kind of surprising that actually how much is out there. When we started looking through it, actually getting in touch with these folks was relatively easy because, CAST and CRIC and CBT, we've already got quite a large reach into that world that we work specifically with quite regularly. So we had 100 plus of our regulars, and then we actually found a few new ones along the way as well that we didn't know were out there. But I mean, to give you an idea just on the impact, there's very close to 5,000 people in the Columbia Basin that are working in this sector. So it's certainly nothing to sneeze at. It's not a small sector for sure. Okay. And what did you find when you went out there? What was the reception? Were people wanting to talk? What did you find? People actually were really, really keen to talk. We know that Kootenay folks are friendly folks out here to begin with, but they were really quite keen to help us out with this. And what we actually heard a number of times throughout this was that they were really happy that we were coming to them first. They had mentioned some anecdotal stories in the past of perhaps where plans had been made for groups without necessarily involving them. So they were really quite keen that we were coming to them first and saying, hey, what do you need? Before we try to sit in our office and tell them what they need. So on that front, they were really quite happy about it, I would say, for the most part. Okay, and so what, in essence, do they need? So what we learned, I guess the broad statement of what we learned is that we do have a fairly stable and strong manufacturing in particular is quite a long-standing industry we have in the area, and technology is actually stronger than many people might expect in that it's in a good place right now, and that it's potentially on its way to a great or really excellent place, but it's going to need perhaps a little bit of help to get there. So we came up with a series of, what do we have, I believe 10 broad recommendations. In the end, we came up with, I can just touch on them briefly here if you like first, but Andrew, before you get to that though, I wanted to ask you, what did you ask them in essence to get some idea of what their needs were? Sure, yeah, great question. So we had a survey that we came up with that was roughly 126 questions long, but in addition to the survey, it was usually about an hour and a half of sitting down with them at their place of business, and then apart from the questions, really getting into some side conversations, which is really where we got a lot of the great information from as well. But to give you an idea of what we were asking them, first we start with a bit of a company profile. Tell us what it is you do, who are your competitors, where are you selling, that type of stuff. How long have you been in business? And then we get a little bit more talking into, tell us about your workforce, how many people do you have, where do you get them from, who's hard to find, who's not hard to find, that type of stuff. And then jumping into, learning more about their sales, learning more about their facility and the equipment they use. And then some of the interesting stuff was for me especially, I found was talking about the specific area. What are the government services or the various services here that are working well, that aren't working well? Tell us about, why is this a great place to do business? Why is this not a great place to do business? How's your company health? That's sort of the broad range of what we talked about. But it was, to give you an idea of the spreadsheet that I was working with, if you love spreadsheets, you would have loved this project. We're talking 179 companies answering 126 questions. So it was a pretty serious amount of data that we had to work with to do the analysis.
Now, I want to stop you there because I think it was Kelvin told me about this some time ago, and I think I've been asking, so when you guys have this, I want to get you on the air. And it's taken a while to sort of crunch all these numbers, hasn't it?
It has. Yeah, it was no small feat, and we had a number of people helping us out. As part of this, we had an advisory committee that was made up of some representatives from the Columbia Basin Rural Development Institute, which was a really huge help with us on this one. The Columbia Basin Trust themselves. We had a couple members from Selkirk College, and then us here at CAST and over at Crick. So we had a really good team, and when you look at numbers, everybody comes up with a little bit slightly different analysis. So it was, it took us about roughly a year to do all the surveys. And then we had probably about a good 3 months of really batting around the data of what does this all mean, and then what can we do about it. So yeah, it was certainly there was a lot of brains and a lot of good minds put on this. So we're pretty confident that the results are very thorough.
All right, let's talk about those results now.
Yeah, so I guess to give you the broad idea, we came up with a series of. Actually, maybe what I'll do is I'll give you the brief overview of some of the interesting stuff that we found out here before we go into the recommendation stage.
All right.
So we talked to 179 companies. We found out that there was about 4,500 employees among them. And some of the good news stories is that 86% of those employees were full-time. And, and one of the really neat things in this area is that some of these businesses are quite long-standing. Roughly a third of them have been in business for over 20 years. And to give you an idea on the impact that has for the economy, just those 179 companies we talked to are doing about $2.6 billion in sales a year. So this is not a tiny little sector we're nurturing here. This is something that is very large and potentially to get quite a bit larger.
Now, do we in that list? Do we have companies like Tech and do we have the mills and that kind of thing in there, like very large kind of entities?
That's right. Yeah, there are some large ones in there like Tech and Stelgar and some of the bigger guys. The Pacific Insights, and then it goes right on down on the technology side to some of your 1- and 2-person, software and app developers that we have. So it really was a really big range, for sure, a large range in the companies we talked to.
All right. And what else do you have?
Well, some of the really optimistic stuff that we came up with was that, for example, 76% of the companies we talked to, their sales over the last 5 years have been trending upwards. And of those, over half of them are growing by greater than 10% a year. So that was really great news. But, typical Kootenay optimism that we have out there, the great attitude in this area is that about 60+% of the people said that they believe the market for their product is increasing, and that about 60% as well said that their market share their share of the market, it was actually growing as well that they saw. So people were very optimistic that they were growing and that things were getting better.
All right.
But now that's not to say there wasn't challenges as well. There was a lot of good news, but there was quite a number of challenges identified as well, which is good because it means CAST and CBT and Crick has something to do here to help out.
So tell us about some of those.
One of the big ones was around the idea of the workforce. We had about a quarter of the people actually said that just the growth was finding enough people with the right skills to come in and work for them, and that's on the manufacturing side, it's a story that we've heard before that people are getting pulled away to places like the oil sands where they're getting paid more, and it makes it a little more challenging perhaps to keep people here. But we also talked to some folks out there that had talking about that same stat that has some really good news stories to share. And there were a couple of we had talked to said they had lost staff that were relatively young, let's say mid-20s or early 20s or late 20s, getting into their careers. That had gone away to make that extra money in the oil sands. But they said they're now seeing a trend of people returning from those jobs saying, the money was great, but we can't have a lifestyle up here. We can't have the life that we want to live. We want to raise a family. We want to have all these great recreation opportunities. So they're actually now starting to see a certain amount of migration back of those people that want to start families and starting to realize that the lifestyle here, like we all know here, is a major draw, and that there's a number of people out there that are willing to take a few less dollars to have that fantastic lifestyle out here.
All right. We have just a couple of moments left. Do you want to hit some of the highlights in a summary for us?
Well, yeah, I'll give you a bit of an idea on some of the recommendations that we're doing out there, things that we think that can really help this out. And, for example, one of them is getting around the workforce idea is training. And let's match up the training we have in the area with the skills that people need. It sounds relatively simple, but it's not necessarily always happening out there. So it's us working with the education institutions like the College of the Rockies, Selkirk College, and saying, look, this is what people are telling us the skills they need. Maybe you want to consider working on some courses to train people here locally, because we did hear that about 3/4 of the people said training is very important for their business, but we also heard that about half of those people said the training available here is not meeting their needs. So there's a tremendous opportunity on that front.
Okay.
And then there's the usual ones that we hear often, like we'd love to see a better upgraded airport, especially in the West Kootenay side mostly, and that people would love to see better upgraded telecommunications. But one of the other ones that I think was really, really interesting was the idea of regional promotion. That came up time and time again. And often you think, okay, it's marketing this area to customers outside the area, but perhaps at least an equal or perhaps bigger part of that is marketing it within the region. We hear fairly regularly at CAS of people saying, oh, I didn't know that company existed, or I didn't know the skills were available here. So it's matching up people that need certain skills and products with things that are already happening here that people may not know about. So say I need an app developer. Well, if I don't know app developers are here, I can't hire locally. So that could be developing a tech directory or getting more collaboration and networking happening together, but making people more aware of what's already available here, because we have a tremendous amount of talent and skills and products available here. People just need to know that they're out there.
Right. And is there a point that we can wrap on?
Well, I think the real point is, and this is one that I think was really exciting. When we talked specifically to the manufacturing people about, are you planning any expansions in the future years? We actually heard that there's already, in the next 3 to 5 years, well over $500 million of capital expansion projects planned to happen. So there's people here that are growing and want to grow in a big, big way. And if we can just give them that little helping hand, then this is just going to really fly. It's going to go big time.
Good deal. Well, it's always good to have this kind of information. It gives people, I think, a better perspective on where they live and try to work.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Andrew Zwicker, thank you very much from CAST. We hope to have you back as you go through the rest of... What's the rest of this process, by the way?
Well, now we're starting to move into... The next page is going to be our strategic action plan. So it's taking those recommendations and building the actual action plan of, okay, now we know here's the 10 areas we want to work in. What do we actually do? How do we actually do it? So that's the phase we're moving into next year, that strategic action plan.
Good deal. Well, thank you, Andrew. Remember to come back on the air when you get that information.
Oh, thanks, Mark. My pleasure.
All right. Have yourself a good day.
You as well.
All right. 29 after 8 o'clock now. It's Friday. Going to be a gorgeous day. It's Friday. Going to be a gorgeous day. It's